Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, one badass mini ITX build, more 10-nanometer Intel goodness, a great gaming mouse, Corsair 600Q is seriously quiet, dual Fiji AMD, and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 348, recorded January 28th, 2016. One seriously tiny ITX build. Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton, joined as always by Mr. Ryan Shrout. And this week, ladies and gentlemen, we promise you absolutely nothing. We're probably lying through our teeth and attempting to fill you with the worst possible hardware information available on the planet.
Well, see, now you just went and promised something just in the opposite direction that we wanted to do.
I always do a regular show and talk about informative and useful things in the hardware, tablet, phone. I'm actually really excited this week. I finally got to build. We did it for a Patreon build, a Patreon bonus build on Tech Thing this week. My S4 mini enclosure. I don't know if you guys have the page from that, NFC-systems.com. It's a mini ITX build. It's 13 inches by 2.5 inches by 8.5 inches. It is super tiny, and I am so stoked. It's like two or three. It's like contemporary laptops. It's like 3 laptops stacked up on each other, and I'm actually using it right now. And it's crazy because with this little tiny Zolman CPU cooler, I'm running a Core i7-6700, which is like a 65-watt part. Probably should have looked for the 6700U, which is like a 35 or 45-watt part. And I currently have a 750 Ti, and that will be upgraded eventually to a 950. You can see my long-suffering 840 EBO 1 terabyte. And the crazy, you can just barely see it, that thing, the capacitor's there on the top of your screen, that is a 250-watt HD Plex Hi-Fi DC to DC power converter. So I'm actually surprised, like in terms of looking at, kind of what my low-grade benchmark, which is, I don't have the side. The other side actually looks like this side. You can see the slots in the enclosure. I just don't have it screwed on right now because I have to rewire the power chip. But I'm pretty stoked about it. The power supply is DC to DC, and I was actually pretty amazed at how stable it's working so far. I did, however, already order a Noctua cooler to replace this one to see if I can get it to run a little bit cooler. But like a Prime 95 full torture test, it's running about 3,800 megahertz. So it's I'd like to get it a little bit cooler to be able to.
What temperature is it running at?
That's like bouncing up against 99 to 100 degrees.
Celsius?
It's a really good question.
Because if that's true, then I would not do that very often.
Just throttles down until it's fine.
I had an issue when I was putting a cooler on yesterday where the cooler was not making any contact with the processor, and in the BIOS it was running at 78 degrees Celsius. That was a problem. Yeah. So
this one's it's idling at like 19 degrees Celsius.
Oh, okay.
But if I do a Prime 95 torture test, then I can get it up to like 100 degrees, running at like, I want to say 3,800 megahertz at that point. So I'm gonna put a slightly larger, denser cooler on there. Noctua's got a fairly low profile cooler, and I will report next week with the results of the cooler swap. But I'm hoping to get it to run at maximum speed, without throttling down at all, the maximum turbo mode. So. Anyhow, shout out to NFC Systems.
Noctua makes some pretty good low-profile coolers that you should be able to fit into that spot. Yeah. This can be tight, though.
Well, I'm the one who wanted to. I very rarely see a case and go, I must have the thing. I must have the thing. But in this case, I saw the case. I spent $150 on the enclosure and $85 on that crazy 250-watt DC to DC power supply. That doesn't count the cost of the DC power supply that feeds that. So,
right.
but I have a little tiny enclosure with a Core i7 6700 in it.
That's pretty cool.
For those listening in radio world, that was a thumbs up. This is, I was kind of curious about this one. Sebastian wrote this up for PC Per. Intel Tigerlake revealed company's third 10 nanometer CPU. And it's off of, you know, really one of the premier sources of tech news available in the world, The Motley Fool, which actually is a financial website. I'm teasing. But so it looks like Intel is going to deliver 3 architectures at 10 nanometer. Kaby Lake's going to remain at 14 nanometer. And the sort of 2-year TikTok cycle, it sounds like, is going to, well, they're going to quote, this is what quoting, Sebastian's quoting The Motley Fool. Intel's pushing to try to get back to a 2-year cadence post 10 nanometer. Presumably, they mean a 2-year transition from 10 nanometer to 7 nanometer. However, from what I just learned from a source familiar with Intel's plans, the company is working on 3, not 2 architectures for the 10 nanometer node. So that's Cannon Lake, Ice Lake, and Tiger Lake. And that'll take us through 2019, it sounds like. I mean, what are these? Are these desktop, mobile, you know, Internet of Things? Do we know what they're going to be at this point, this far out?
Not really. So these are the core architectures, right? And I honestly don't know what the emphasis of those architectures will be in that far out into the future.
Internet of Dogs. It's the next big thing.
Right. So I mean, it's going to be for mobile devices. Will Intel really spend a whole lot more time developing smartphone performance like smartphone TDP level processors? Is kind of up in the air, honestly.
Right.
But these are all things that we will see eventually. I guess what I take away from this story is the end, almost an official end of the TikTok era and going into like TikTok talk or tick talk. I don't really know which one is which. But
I think the talk is the die shrink and the tick is the new architecture. I do the same thing, man.
I honestly have zero idea. So you could have said
you keep talking. Yes. I'll look this up and we will satisfy our hunger for knowledge.
The detriment here is that we are extending each process technology by an additional year. So instead of going, you know, every other year as we had been over the last, I don't know, let's say 7 years, 8 years or so from Intel, would be slowing down some. And there's a couple of reasons for that, right? You have technological reasons. Just as you shrink down the process node, it becomes increasingly more difficult to actually get things to work and operate it that way. And then you have the competition factor, which is there is none really for Intel on the desktop side or like the laptop side, right? It's pretty much dominated by Intel. So you would assume where their competition lies is still in those ARM architectures, your MediaTeks, your Qualcomms of the world. If Intel still values getting into the smartphone market, getting into the small tablet market, getting into IoT, getting into, you know, those platforms, being able to get additional performance at smaller process technologies is going to be extremely valuable. So the takeaway from this is kind of that process technology isn't going to expand as quickly or evolve as quickly as it has been. And this, I guess they say that the Intel executives were trying to get back to a 2-year cycle after the move away from 10 nanometer. But that's, again, we're talking about a 2020 discussion, 2021 discussion to be having as opposed to a 2016 discussion on whether or not they'll actually stick to that. It's very easy to say what your projections are and your goals. Even in a publicly traded company like Intel, it's easy to say this is what we want to do, but whether or not it happens in 5 years is, you know, to be seen.
Plans have been known to change
from time to time.
By the way, TikTok currently started in 2007, an 18-month cycle. Every tick represents the shrinking of process technology. Every tock designated the new micro architecture. So essentially, the tick introduces the new micro architecture on a process technology that all of the bugs are worked out of. And then once they have all the bugs worked out, then they
I'm going to be
they're
honest
way
with you.
down.
Next week, I will have completely forgotten this discussion.
I know, but
Yeah.
today, for a brief few shining moments, we knew,
Fair.
and that's okay,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah. Fair.
because we're supposed to know these things.
Yep.
GDDR5X memory standard gets official with JEDEC, which is an acronym I still can't pronounce. You know, the leaks have been coming for the last few weeks. Derived from widely adopted GDDR5 SGRAM JEDEC standard, the GDDR5X specifies key elements related to design and operability of memory chips for applications requiring very high memory bandwidth, targeting data rates of 10 to 14 gigabits per second, and 2x increase over GDDR5. So basically, it's the same signaling as GDDR5 with more bandwidth per se.
Right.
And there's a really nice, there you're looking at it right now. There's a lovely little graph there in the little right-hand corner where GDDR5 is flattening out at like 8 gigabits per second. And GDDR5X will take us to the next level. And
Yeah,
there's lowly DDR4. Yeah.
It's a little deceiving. If you look at the y-axis on that graph, it says data rate per pin. It's not like total data rate. And GDDR5X is really an interesting discussion because I honestly, I don't know everything about it that I should know yet. But it is doubling the amount of data that the controller can get per prefetch, but it doesn't necessarily change the throughput on your data rate in total necessarily. It does by some amount, but I don't know what exactly. It can kind of improve on the efficiency of the memory controller as well. And the only reason I'm not like super stoked about this is my discussions I've had with AMD and NVIDIA GPU engineers, they're not super excited about it either. Nobody seems really stoked for the development or the adoption of GDDR5X. That being said, it doesn't mean we won't see GPUs that use it. It just means that either it's not going to be this generation because they didn't have time to develop that into their memory controller, or it's really just a very small kind of incremental performance difference, but everybody's really pushing forward to try to get HBM down to a cost-effective area where it is going to have a dramatic shift, a dramatic change in memory bandwidth compared to what you get there. Yeah, and that's the other big thing is nowhere in the discussion from GDDR5X from JEDEC do they talk about power efficiency, and that is really the biggest driving factor on the move from GDDR5 to HBM is that it is significantly more efficient in terms of bandwidth per watt than GDDR5. And so if X uses more power to get the additional bandwidth, then it won't improve that metric really any.
Good
but
to know.
It's still possible we see a Polaris or a Pascal part that uses it. I just, based on the lack of enthusiasm from people internally at these companies, I hesitate to think that that would actually turn out to be the case.
That can't possibly happen.
Yeah, when the rumors first came out, they were talking, not they, I will say the community started talking about, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. They're talking about doubling the bandwidth of GDDR5, HBM not as necessary for future, GPUs. And I just don't think that's actually the case. So.
Good to know.
Yeah.
You have a new favorite mouse, the Logitech G502 Proteus Spectrum, which is just a strange name even for a gaming mouse.
Yeah, it is that for sure. Logitech has gone down a deep rabbit hole of naming their products just in, I'd say, the last couple of years or so. I
will say the weight system on this is fascinating. And I'm not trying to be snarky when I say that. They've actually done something really interesting.
Yeah, so the G502 as a product in and of itself has actually been around for a while. A year or so. The Proteus Core is what they call that one. This was the Proteus Spectrum, and in reality, the only change from last year's model to this year's model is the inclusion of an RGB LED system that you can control through the Logitech gaming software, that you can sync with your Logitech keyboard, your Logitech headset, so everything kind of has matching colors or matching patterns or whatever it is you wanted to do with it. It has fairly high-end specifications, up to 12,000 DPI. up to 300 inches, greater than 300 inches per second on there. A 1 gigahertz, I'm sorry, 1 megahertz reporting rate on USB, 32-bit ARM processor, you know, all that type of stuff that you're used to seeing in kind of higher end mice. It's $79 for the RGB model. It's like $65 or so for the non-RGB model, which I think will appeal to more people probably. The weight system is pretty simple, right? Like there's a magnetic door on the bottom of the mouse, and it has spots to put up to 5 3.6 gram individual weights into the device, and you can thus, you know, try it without any weights in it, try it with all the weights, with anything in between, and obviously to your own preferences, you can do what you want. I actually put all of the weights in there because it improves, you know, like when you're clicking the mouse, you're less likely to move the mouse while you're clicking it if it's a little bit heavier, those types of things. But some people who are into fast action games may want the lightness of removing all the weights. It's really just personal preference, but it's a good idea, right? That allows you to kind of experiment and see that. And it's not the first mouse to do that. We've seen mice do this years and years and years ago, but not a whole lot of them do it still today, which is, it's just a neat little addition there. It's got a nice braided cord. I think it feels really good. Mice are very much a like personal preference device, right? Much like keyboards can be, if what your tolerance for sound is. Mouse comfort, right? It's definitely a right-handed mouse. It's not a left-handed mouse in any capacity. It's got enough buttons, but not an overabundance of buttons, which also something I appreciate. I'm not accidentally hitting things on this mouse, which is a plus. You know, adjust DPI settings with a couple of buttons up there. You've got your, I think you got 3 thumb buttons, and then you've got your 2 standard. The wheel can be switched between free spinning and like the click spinning, which I can't find a good name for, which I'm a fan of. Like I prefer almost all of the time the click wheel method, like the where you get some traction in it, if you will, while you're turning it. But a lot of people like the free spin, and I use the free spin if I'm looking at very, very long documents or very long websites, for example. So the RGB stuff is neat, but I'm going to be honest with you, your hand covers the Logitech logo that has the RGB lights in it while you're using it. The only lights that are not covered while you're using it are, you can kind of see them there underneath my index finger. There's 3 outlets there for the DPI lights, DPI setting lights. And you can actually have those be enabled all of the time. So if you have a little bit of color there. And that's basically why you can see the light there on the logo. And if you scroll down the next picture, you should see the software where you can configure it. You can do breathing patterns, you know, color rotation, whatever, sync it up with other devices. The software works amazingly well. It's super simple to work around or work in. But because your hand kind of covers it, you only really get to see the full effect of the light when you're not using the mouse, you know, while you're typing or, you know, while it's just sitting there, right? So it makes a lot of sense for me for people who aren't like OCD about color matching all of their devices on their desk or their chassis, you know, with everything else, that you spend $15 less and get the Proteus core, because it is the same build quality, weighting system, cord, sensor, all that type of stuff. Yeah. So it's been the 502 core has been our gaming PC mouse for a long time. They gave me a 502 Spectrum at CES, and I had just been looking for an excuse to really put that on my desk as my primary mouse, and I did, and now it's good. There you go. That's always a nice bonus for us here.
Yay!
Yeah. And it's not stupid expensive.
No. Yeah, which is an absolute no. I mean, it's always nice when you start looking at gaming peripherals and you don't go like, wow, that's a significant chunk of my mortgage payment, right? Because some of them can really get up to that significant percentage of your mortgage payment territory. I love this laptop. We talked about it a few weeks ago when we reviewed it on Tech Thing, and you guys loved it too. Dell's Inspiron 7000. They do a $799 version of a gaming PC. You know, the closest thing I had to a complaint about it is that, you know, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that it's got a full keyboard on there with a numbers pad on the right side. And because the numbers pad's there, the center of the keyboard is off the center axis of the screen. But beyond that, fantastic battery life for a gaming notebook. Notice I'm qualifying that with gaming notebook, because gaming notebooks are notorious for having 10, 15 minutes of battery life. I'd like to say I'm exaggerating, but I'm only doing so slightly. But this is like Core i5 6300 HQ, NVIDIA GTX 960M. And probably 8 gigabytes of RAM for $799. I have been told by the engineers at Dell that you can configure this, manually configure this, because you can update the drives inside of it, you can update the memory inside of it. They say it should run, with the current BIOS, you should be able to run 32 gigabytes of RAM, which to me means the Core i7 960M with 32 gigabytes of RAM could be the ultimate portable video editing laptop. Most of you aren't probably interested in using Premiere on the road, but it has that potential. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that sort of offset. Like I said, the closest thing I had to a complaint. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see right there where the touchpad and the keyboard are offset from the center of the screen. I found myself balancing the laptop when I used it on my actual lap, with the numpad kind of sticking off my lap, just because I like to be centered on the keyboard. But it really wasn't that bothersome. Ken wrote this up. Ken Addison wrote this up for PC He was a little worried about the screen hinges. He felt they felt a little flimsy. And compared to some of the $1,200, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 laptops we've seen, I don't think they're quite as robust. It's a pretty fantastic deal. Lenovo's Y700, you're looking at a Core i7 6700 with a GTX 960M, 8 gigs of DDR4, 1 terabyte, 5400 RPM hard drive. That's $899. And the Asus Public of Gamers, the ROG GL551, also running a Core i7, but this time a 4720HQ. Again, with the GTX 960M, which is pretty much the sweet spot for discrete graphics if you're not spending all the money on a laptop. And again, a 1 terabyte, 5400 RPM drive, 15.6-inch 1080p screen, $799. But it's pretty awesome. The first thing I would probably do on this is go to an SSD, because I'm so used to SSDs and everything in my life.
Yeah.
But if you scroll down, this is pretty old school. It's a big chunky laptop. It's like an inch thick, which seems huge compared to the Ultrabooks we're carrying around now. But take a look at that 74 watt-hour battery. The memory, it's a single screw on the bottom of the Dell Inspiron 15700, and you can get the SATA port, an M.2 slot, and an empty DIMM slot. So you can either dump another DIMM in there, replace them both. It's all. This is a laptop that you will be able to keep improving over time, or at least max it out and run it till it drops, which I'm a big fan of. And that price, did I mention $799? That's a really good price.
You can actually, Ken found an iteration of this laptop on Amazon that is identical, except it swaps the 1 terabyte hybrid drive for a 256 gig SSD. And I don't know if it's 2.5-inch drive or an M.2 SSD,
Right.
but you get that instead, and it's the same price. It's still $799. So I would probably go that route. Given just those two options, like for the same price, would you take a 256 gig SSD or the 1 terabyte hybrid drive? I'd probably go with the SSD, and either hope that it's an M.2 drive and I can add another 5400 RPM 2.5-inch hard drive to the laptop for storage later if I want to, or if it does ship as a 2.5-inch SSD, just depend on external storage for side of your larger files, whatever. Because I think the benefits of an SSD just really outweigh the capacity differences still for me.
I like it. The other laptop I like, last year at CES, both of us were drooling. CES 2015, a year ago, not CES 2016, a couple weeks ago. Both of us were drooling over the Dell XPS 13, which looks a lot like this. About 15 millimeters at the thick end, 12 inches wide, about 8 inches deep, and it has a great big 13.3-inch screen, which looks very black and empty right now because I forgot to start this thing up. This is the Skylake version of it, Core i5 Skylake version of it. We just reviewed that on Tech Thing last week, and I gotta say, I love this laptop so much.
Yeah.
3200 by 1800 touchscreen, versus a 1080p non-touchscreen version. It's about a $300 difference between those two. And apparently, from what I've been reading, although there are some BIOS changes that may or may not impact battery life, but you're looking at about a 2-hour increase in battery from 8 to 10 hours if you do not have the 3200 by 1800 touchscreen on that.
Yeah.
But it is a nice piece of hardware. I did not have a previous generation 2015 XPS 13 to test it to. Yeah, but you know, it was funny because I started testing it and it was running slower than my 2013 XPS 13. I was like, wait a minute. And I finally found a BIOS update, which apparently they had shipped it from the factory with a slightly lowered TDP. And I did the BIOS upgrade and it took it from like 17 frames per second to 34 frames per second, which is almost twice what the 2013 Core i5 8GB laptop. When I first reviewed this, I thought there was no 16GB version of it. There is a Core i7 16GB version if you dig far enough into Dell's website, and it will require a fair amount of digging to find that 16GB version. Something I thought was interesting is Dell's releasing a gold version of this in March, and they're going to be doing a 32GB version of the XPS 15, which if you're looking for all of their performance because you need all of the RAM, could be really tempting if you want a lot of performance without a lot of space.
Yeah.
256 gigabytes on the configuration I tested, 8 gigabytes of RAM. That prices out at a not inexpensive $1,449, but it is a pretty badass piece of hardware. And as we've seen with a lot of laptops out there, they do a super low-cost $799 version, but that is only 4 gigabytes of memory, a Core i3 processor, and a 128 gigabyte hard drive. Do yourself a favor. Spring $999 for the Core i5 8 gigabyte version, because nobody wants to be running Windows 10 and 4 gigabytes of RAM. I'm just saying.
No, nobody wants to do that. I agree.
Yeah, and the performance is pretty badass for an ultra portable. You know, I have the XPS 13 and I got the 15 in using this, so I'm very curious. I have the Broadwell XPS 13 as that's the one I bought for myself as my personal machine. So I'm very curious if the Skylake variant changes anything, either in terms of functionality or performance, enough for me to want to upgrade. I'm going to guess not, just because, just as my guess. But the XPS 15 might be interesting in that it'll have the bigger screen and it will have more battery life, I think, because it will have additional space for battery in it. More battery.
I've gotten very used to the 13-inch form factor for notebooks, so I'm very curious about what my conclusions will be there. So we'll know that in a couple weeks.
Can you stand a 15-inch laptop?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very legitimate concern for me right now. I don't know if I can go back. Yeah.
Can he go back? Can he stand the pain, the emotional trauma? Perhaps you're just addled enough from the birth of the child that you can make these sorts of dramatic lifestyle changes.
Oh, no.
Corsair Carbide Series 600Q quiet full tower enclosure review. Inverted ATX designs, and Corsair basically says we put the hot stuff on top because heat rises. And you're looking at it right now. If we keep scrolling down a little bit, you'll notice there's a box at the top, which is where the power supply is, which if you're into physics, and we know many of you are, and you know that heat rises because heat does tend to rise, then you'll know that the hot parts being on top makes sense because it makes it easier to keep the cool parts cool. Although, you know, if you're running a 95-watt TDP processor, it's not that cool. But it's a pretty clean case, and it doesn't have a window on the side. Or wait, it has an optional window on the side, doesn't it? Or is this one of the ones that does not have the optional window?
No, it is optional because it comes in two versions, the C version and the Q version. The Q version is quiet and it doesn't have a window, but it's got sound dampening material throughout internally. And the C version is for clear, or as I like to say, see-through, so there is a window. It's
a really clean design. Like, you know, the the way the USB ports are embedded into the top of the case is really nice. You scroll down a little bit, you see the 5¼ inch drive bays that are hidden behind a door, and they did a really good. I got a chance to sort of poke around at this in Corsair's booth at their suite, their location, their den at CES, and it seems to be really well built. And I love the fact that they put the giant filters on the bottom of the case. Because I've been dealing with a lot of dusty PCs lately, and I'm really over dusty PCs in no uncertain terms. Was it? It looked like it would be a fairly easy case to build into. Was it?
Yeah. Other than having to invert all of your decisions as you would normally make.
Oh my goodness! They put it up here.
Right. And you know, you just rotate it and everything's fine. No, building inside of it was pretty good. Sebastian liked it a lot. It's got all the normal kind of cable routing areas and everything. It's literally just rotated 180 degrees inside the case. And as Josh pointed out on our podcast last night, that one of the benefits of having the windowed version and things invert is that, hey, you can actually see, or no, it was Alan that pointed this out, you can actually see the top of your graphics card, like the front of it, like the part that's usually attractive looking, as opposed to maybe a bare PCB, maybe a back plate, maybe not type of thing. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a nice case. I like I'm having just built a incredibly cramped enclosure. I'm liking all of the wire hiding options on this, or the hide it behind the back of the system plan of cable routing. Which, if you're like me and route cables like a small child, is really, really nice. The fairly quiet, right? I mean, CPU temps.
Yeah, if you CPU temps are good. The noise levels are fantastic. If you go, I think on the third page, fourth page maybe it is, he has some results there on terms of the sound testing itself.
It's kind of middle of the road in terms of the temperatures, which isn't a big surprise.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of not built for that, right?
Right.
If you look at the noise levels with low speed on the case fans, because I think the case fan has a 2 or 3 way fan controller built into it. It's at the bottom of the list for sure, under the Fractal Define S, under the Antec P380. So it is a very quiet case as well. But usually, as with most things, if you sacrifice noise for performance and vice versa, so you're going to get a little bit higher temperatures, but as long as it's good enough to maintain the performance levels you want to get, then sure, no problem.
And I will say all of those cases are pretty quiet. I mean, the Carbide 600 Q, you're looking at 33 to 35 dB, which is really, really quiet. But the loudest of those cases, which is the Antec P380, you're looking at 38.9 to 39.6 decibels, which is pretty manageable in terms of noise, unless you are disturbingly sensitive, in which case you really might want to start wearing earplugs or headphones or something like that. Yeah. Oh my goodness. The NZXT introduces the Manta Mini ITX enclosure, and you may be wondering to yourself, why would they call it a Manta? And I'm guessing it has something to do with the shape, which has me thinking about the last years of Comdex, when PC manufacturers were playing with some really crazy, and actually Compaq were doing these sort of really crazy injection molded cases that didn't look like PCs, because it's important not to look like a PC, but it's rounded, and it has a lot of cooling options. Because if you look at the expanded version, there's like 2 fans and a radiator above, or 2 sets of fans and a radiator in the front, plus a fan in the rear. It's 7.87 by 17.52 by 17 inches. Or excuse me, this Manta, the one we're looking at, is 9.65 by 16.77 by 17.72 inches, which is really not that big. And it'll fit, a a 280 millimeter radiator in the front, a 280 millimeter radiator in the top, 120 millimeter radiator in the rear. It's got two 3.5-inch drive bays, three 2.5-inch drive bays, 160 millimeters by 363 millimeters on the GPU clearance. There's a lot of space inside of this case. I mean, that's big. That's big and functional. And
does it seem too big to be a mini ITX case?
I don't know. I mean, I've got a thermal take I paid $50 for that's probably like 15 by 15.
Yeah. I guess at the size, it's almost as big, or it is bigger than at least a handful of micro ATX cases. And it's just a little bit like, I don't know, if you're going to make your case that size, fine. Like I'm all for unique designs and that type of thing, and the exhale form and whatever, room for more water cooling, fantastic. But limiting it to mini ITX just seems a little odd to me. I don't know if they have plans for other iterations, but
yeah, they might, or maybe it's just one of those products that started out and they kind of built it before they realized what they had. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's always room for one more mini ITX case, and it's probably going to be easier to build that than it was to Tetris together the machine sitting to my right now.
Yeah.
Were you expecting AMD to show off the dual Fiji graphics card? This month?
Well, no, I did not go to VRLA.
Would you have gone to VLRA if you had known that they were going to debut that card there, that dual Fiji GPU?
No, because all they didn't actually show it to anybody, right? So that picture there that you're looking at is a Falcon Northwest Tiki prototype system that has, they say, and I believe them, but it has the dual GPU Fiji graphics card in it, and it was running the VR demos that AMD had at their booth. Now, the photo you see below that, which is AMD's now CEO holding up that card, that's from June of 2015, when they actually first kind of started discussing the dual GPU Fiji graphics card. That at that point they promised would be a fall 2015 release. As my calendar checks, it is now winter 2016. So the card, honestly, I hadn't forgotten about it, but I just kind of thought, maybe this is a card they're not going to bother with at this point, right? They've talked about Polaris, they've talked about the advantages of Polaris. It would seem kind of odd for them to release another card based on a less efficient architecture, but then double up the number of GPUs on it at the same time. But it's possible that they release this to the public as a kind of like the card for VR, right? Obviously, they're showing it at VRLA. It kind of makes sense for that.
Right.
The idea being, hey, you've got one GPU per eye. If you change the way the software works, the multi-GPU algorithm could work really well in that environment. As it is today, like alternate frame rendering is not a good idea for VR because it increases latency and frame distribution times kind of go haywire, even in the best case scenarios sometimes.
Perhaps they recently purchased a large supply of 1,500 watt PSUs and are looking for a way to justify the purchase. Maybe they will bundle a 1,500 watt GPU with every dual Fiji.
That's true.
Graphics card.
They could bundle some power supplies. Maybe AMD is going to have their own power supply brand, like they have SSD and memory brands as well. Seems unlikely, but it's possible.
Sorry,
I actually want to see the card. Like, I want to test the card. I want to know what its performance is like, what its price point would be, what its cooling solution would be. I just don't know if the market is at a spot where it's ready for another $1,000 GPU that is on the very, very tail end of that architecture, that process node, that whole mentality from AMD. So I would consider it a 50-50 shot that it ever actually sees daylight. So
the $220 Showdown XFX R9 380 DD Black Edition OC 4GB versus the GTX 960 over at hardocp.com. If you are, for most of us, most of our gaming needs can be met with a 950. You get I feel like you're getting like a 15% boost going from a 950 to a 960. If you are looking for pretty badass 1080p gaming performance, this is your price bracket, $220. The R9 380 and the GTX 960. It's a really nice review by HardOCP. I will say the answer may surprise you. But I'm going to send you over to I'm going to send you people over to HardOCP to read the review because, they went to the effort of like writing it and doing the benchmarking and stuff, and they deserve traffic. But I was actually kind of intrigued by the benchmark results. They were tighter than I expected them to be.
Cool.
There's interesting stuff going on there. It's worth checking out if you're in the market for a $220 GPU, which if you're doing 1080p gaming is probably about as much as you should be spending right now. So, in theory, this didn't play all of the games at maximum settings at 1080p. But the crew at HardOCP notes that the gaming experience delivered by the video card was exceptionally smooth. So
there you go.
There you go. And GPU availability is not as smooth as we would like in that price category.
It moves around a lot. There's a lot of shifts and changes for sure.
Not as bad as, say, Core i7 6700s, but that's a whole nother conversation, or 6700Ks. PC Per is going racing, ladies and gentlemen. Thursday, January 28th, 5:30 p.m. That would be in about, now.
An hour. About an hour.
About an hour
so.
from now.
Yeah.
However, I'm sure that Ryan will post the glorious results of their racing experimentation at PCPer.com, should you care to enjoy some dead racing experience.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. It's not live, it's dead.
Everybody likes to come into these live streams because I'm bad at them. Like, for example, on the racing streams that we do, Josh takes his stuff very seriously. He's a big racing game enthusiast.
Right.
I only prefer games that allow me to drive backwards and run into him while he's trying to like get his best lap times, right? Like those are the things that I'm into in racing games. And I think he does it on purpose. He picks games that are so sim-like, so particular that they don't let me drive backwards most of the time. They're like, no, can't do that. And they're like all, snooty about it. Like, no, this is for real driving only. So I got to figure out a way around it, but we'll do what we can.
Just have to choose a better game, dude.
And we're giving away a racing wheel, too, a $200 racing wheel from Thrustmaster. Ooh. So watch the live stream. You could win a racing wheel. And then the next time we have a racing live stream, you can participate in it. And also try to drive backwards and run into Josh.
Everyone needs a life goal. I now have a life goal involving Josh. I'm sure Josh is thrilled. I can hear emanating from Wyoming the joy that Josh is feeling at that thought. Oh, my goodness. TechThing.com this week, we just posted up our show. We actually walked through Veracrypt. I know a lot of people are curious, like, what do I use now that TrueCrypt's on? Well, TrueCrypt is no longer considered trustworthy. Check out Veracrypt, and Shannon shows you how to encrypt an external drive on that. We talk about, we had a funny viewer question. They got a Nexus 6P, and they basically were like, it's got a Type-C port. I want to turn it into a desktop. And we talk about why that might not work the way you think it should. And some portable audio player recommendations and a general set of rules and stuff to try. We had a viewer who their gaming machine has gone from like 200 to 500 frames per second down to 100, and we kind of walk through like all of the things you want to check when your system suddenly stops behaving the way it used to behave performance-wise. So speeding up your PC pretty much for free, because free is how we like to roll when we're not building out of control by our standards mini ITX builds. Nice. So anything you can tease about? I mean, I know you're getting ready. You're going to be racing, possibly backwards,
right?
Possibly damaging your relationship permanently with Josh. Anything else you can tell us about coming up?
We'll have a story up before next week that looks at the performance of 3 M.2 Samsung 950 SSDs running on the same motherboard. Hopefully, I will have later tonight a story up about quick look at Tomb Raiders, the new Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider GPU performance on 6 or 7 graphics cards on that way, comparing some AMD and NVIDIA numbers. And as you'd expect, there's some drama because it's an NVIDIA, the way it's meant to be played game. So that'll be interesting to discuss. But other than that, we're also starting a PC build with my 14-year-old nephew sometime as well, because we're finally have all the hardware in for that. So that'll be first-time builder, trying to convert him over.
Mazel
we'll see how
tov.
that goes. Yeah, exactly.
And now you are a man in our tribe, or a woman if you're building your first PC as a woman. Oh my goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I am going to call an end to the madness so that Ryan can go drive backwards at high speed. PCPro.com is the place to find Mr. Ryan Shrout. I'm at Ryan Shrout on Twitter. I'm at Patrick Norton. You can find me at TEKTHING.com. And by the way, Robert Heron and I are doing a home theater and home entertainment podcast. Again, you can find that at avxl.com. And
awesome.
Thank you, each and every one of you, for listening this week. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.